Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. And on this video, I'm going to be talking about the total lunar eclipse on the 7th of September. And of course, all the things that are surrounding that, what other aspects are forming, its general meaning, and a little tiny bit on what it may mean in terms of world events. And then I'm going to do it sign by sign. So it's a big, long video, and we better get ourselves geared up for it. But before I do that, always my thanks, my gratitude for the enthusiasm with which you make comments and also support me. It's just great, and it makes it all worthwhile. It really does. Thank you so much. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe and like if you like. But what I wanted to talk about before I get into it is that I know a lot of you because you write to me and ask if I would do, can they have a consultation? And of course, the answer has been for a very, very long time, no, because I don't have the time. And the only consultations I do have space for are with my existing clients. Now, I realize that this is no way to go on, but a lot of you may not know that there is a way to get my advice and my thoughts on certain things, and that's to opt for my Ask Penny service. Which means you have a little place there to write your question, which can be absolutely anything. Everybody has different things that are burning issues. Will my relationship last? All those sort of things that are familiar to us all. But I do need a little bit of background. In other words, if you're writing to me about a job situation, let me know what the kind of work you do already, so I know I'm in the right area. I'm not having to guess at what you do. And the same really for a relationship matter. Please give me the other person in the relationship, their data. Now, technically, to be ethical, that data should be requested from the person, and they also need to say, oh yeah, that's okay, you can have my birth data. But anyway, as far as looking at a relationship and the potential for a relationship, I really need to have both people's data in that. So I take about 3 weeks to get back to you because there's always a volume of people who want to use that Ask Penny service. But it is me. I do get back to you. You do hear my voice. And it is certainly a stopgap until I get back to doing consultations full time. So I just thought I'd pop that in. So let's begin. Let's talk about this total lunar eclipse in Pisces. The sun is in Virgo. The moon is in Pisces. Now, eclipses are always game changers. If we go way back to Babylonian times, thousands of years BC, when eclipses were being noted, they were always associated with the births of kings, the deaths of kings, the wars, famine, losses. They were all really rather dramatic. And although astrology today is more psychologically based, we still look at eclipses and think, oh, we better pay attention, because so often there are more difficult things, more challenging things to deal with around the time of an eclipse. And there are great, joyous, easy events. And of course, at the particular time we're in, what we're living through, there are just so many very, very great and uncertain situations in the world. And obviously, these eclipses are going to have a big part in the narrative of how the war in Gaza, what's going on in Sudan, the war in Ukraine, in big political decisions being made in any nation, and particularly America. So we're going to be looking at, this eclipse is going to have a bearing on all of those things. They're game changers. They change things. Now, when we look at this astrologically and astronomically, the reason why eclipses are considered to be very fateful things is because, of course, the only way an eclipse can occur is when the path of the moon intersects or meets the path of the sun, the ecliptic. So when those 2 points occur, they occur at what we call the nodal points, the moon's nodal points. And they're the little squiggles that you see in a horoscope, the nodal axis, the north node and the south node. That's where eclipses occur. And of course, that's moving all the time. So you have a nodal axis at the time you were born, which is showing you where the eclipses at the time you were born occurred. And that's why, in terms of your life, your fate, your destiny, your deep, deep past and your future going forward, that's why we take such an interest in that nodal axis. And why, when we're looking at the sky at the moment, the celestial sphere at the moment, where the nodes are, where the nodal axis is, and I have to say it's moving backwards through the sign of Pisces, Virgo. That's where eclipses take place. So hopefully that clears up a few things about what the nodes are and why eclipses are tied up with the nodes. And honestly, I really do think an understanding of the empirical, or what's really going on, the astronomy of the piece is often very helpful to us to understand what its meaning is in terms of the astrology. So a little bit more information about this total lunar eclipse. It's one of the longer eclipses. It's going to take quite a long time, about 5 hours, to really be complete. And its maximum, I think, when it's at its maximum point, that's about 1 hour and 22 minutes. So you'll be able to see that kind of maximum point, that is maximum. Working from memory, we're going to be looking at East Africa, we're looking at Russia, Asia, Hawaii, and a little bit of Alaska. Well, that's interesting already, isn't it? You don't need me to tell you that. But also you'll be able to see it in Europe and the rest of Africa and Australia, particularly the west to the mid part of Australia. And you'll see it anyway. It's just that we're making a point of saying where it's at its maximum. Now, this lunar eclipse is obviously a full moon, and a full moon occurs in Virgo, Pisces every single year. And this full moon is known as the corn moon. And that is because the corn is at its ripest. It's ready to be picked and eaten. And there is a sense that there is a period when things are done and dusted. And this kind of goes along really with the idea of the moon in Pisces, because it is the last sign of the zodiac. It rules the last house of the zodiac. And whenever we're looking at Pisces in the 12th house, we're looking at dissolution. We're looking at the breaking down of things, the reflection on things, the processing of it all. And coming back to this idea of the full moon and the lunar eclipse, it's a time to give thanks. It's a time to reflect on what's been happening these last 12 months, September through September, and to give thanks for having come through, even if what you've come through wasn't exactly fun and games. But it's a principle. And, I do like to look at these things and think about how we can look at the astrology consciously and then not exactly incorporate it into our lives, but allow it to be a thinking point, because then we're allowing the astrology to give us all of that much more important information that we can't see or we're not aware of because we lead such busy lives. Also, when we think of this lunar eclipse, the full moon in Pisces, and its opposite sign, Virgo, where the sun is, we're looking at things to do with health. The health services, social services, they all come under that Virgo Pisces axis. And when we think about Pisces, it is about healing. It is also about suffering. And it's also about transcendence. In other words, you are rising above the situations in your life. And these are good things to be thinking about around the time of this lunar eclipse, kind of tuning in to what it means. I also think what's kind of important about this eclipse, or the full moon, is what's being said about it that appears to have a great deal to say about it, and it's not the case. This is being called the blood, the lunar blood eclipse, the full blood moon. And of course, the minute you say that word blood, you think about bloody things, whereas in fact it's just to do with the color that happens to the moon, the full sphere of the moon, because of the refraction of the sun's light. And it doesn't really mean that it causes or it's associated with bloody events. That having been said, of course, we have had some awful things going on, and so it might well coincide with further events that are disturbing to us. But really and truly, let's get the facts where they need to be with this one. Now, I also did a little bit of research, and I think I'm going to put my glasses on for this because I don't want to miss anything out. And the first thing that I wanted to look at was the idea that this lunar eclipse is a mirror image of a previous lunar eclipse that we had in March the 14th of this year. So there is a kind of relationship between these two. Now, normally I talk about the new moon in Pisces having a relationship with the full moon in Pisces. And yes, that may indeed be the case. But we're looking specifically at the idea of the eclipses and turning them on their ends so that they are a mirror image. So events around the 14th of March could be relevant to what's going on around the 7th of September. Now, I did make a note of a couple of things that I thought were kind of important. In fact, on the 14th of March, which was the day of the previous lunar eclipse, Mark Carney became the leader of Canada. And I thought that was really significant. And other things around that time, there were a lot of storms. There were tornadoes across the Midwest and the south of the USA. I mean, really kind of rolling tornadoes did a huge amount of damage. And there was another typhoon, I think it was called the Alfred or the Albert typhoon. I think it's probably Alfred. And that really hit Australia. And, from time to time, we've talked about, or I've talked about, the fact that we've got Sheet, the fixed star, which is associated with water events, and not in a good way, having been present on so many of the really big disasters that we've had, earthquakes, things like that. And so I think that we can't rule that out of this, at the time around the lunar eclipse, that we won't get, even more kind of seismic activity. And we've had some pretty large scale events this year. And in fact, one of the other ones, I actually lost my note on that. We'll have to go from memory. That occurred, I think, on the 28th or 29th of March, just before the solar eclipse in Aries. And that was, I think, 7.7 or 8.1 on the Richter scale. And that was the one in Myanmar. So I do think we're on earthquake watch around the time of the lunar eclipse, and also the following solar eclipse on the 21st of September is also another time. And I should say, and this is, very interesting, well, to me it's very interesting, is that the recent new moon, which was at 0 degrees of Virgo, was exactly square Uranus. And I have done a separate video on that, which, of course, has got all my thoughts about that. Well, I'm actually recording this video to you 7 days before that the new moon in square to Uranus. So we haven't as yet had any big earthquake activity. But again, that would be another prime time. Although by the time you're seeing me here, that will all have passed. But I thought I'd just mention it because it seems so significant to me. And also, when I looked at the degree areas of that new moon that squares Uranus, that Ukraine's sun is 0 degrees of Virgo. And, if we come to this total lunar eclipse, and we're looking at 15 degrees of Virgo Pisces, that isn't too far away from Zelensky's MCIC axis. And it's also fairly near to Prince Harry's Mars. So these are people in the news, so to speak, who you can expect to be in the news for important developments occurring in their lives. And there are probably others. It's just I haven't got time to go through all the leaders and celebrities in the world and all the countries in the world before I come and do these videos. But I think that is kind of important that we look at that. And again, I'm speaking to you hours after that hugely significant meeting in Alaska took place between Trump and Putin. And I'm not going to get into that because by the time this video is up, we'll probably know more about it. But I do think that what was already decided even before that meeting, so that in a way that meeting was window dressing and served Vladimir Putin very well, that until it's unraveled a bit further and we can start to see just how much Ukraine, the Zelensky, Europe, everyone else with an interest in this war in Ukraine is going to respond. And actually, I'm also thinking about the Israel-Gaza situation, which is also at a very, very tense point, and this lunar eclipse is going to play into that as well. But coming back to the new moon eclipse, which is square, Ukraine's sun, 0 degrees of Virgo, that it seems to me that there is an explosive reaction to what's going on with the big players, if you like, forcing the pace on Ukraine and forcing maybe even Zelensky into a corner, and that we see some kind of response about that. Now, the reason I'm talking about it is that by the time we get to this lunar eclipse, we're going to see some other kind of conclusion related still to these same events. So, watch out there, because I do think we are not just living in unprecedented times, we are living in very, very dangerous times. And, I can't pretend to know everything that's at stake here, although I know a lot, but I think a lot of what's taking place between these times, the new moon squaring Uranus and the solar eclipse on the 21st of September, a lot of things are going to have happened that are going to make things, they're going to shunt things in the direction that they will be in for future times. It's that important. So before I get to show you the chart, which is where we need to go next, I just want to mention, I've given you a list, and in fact, let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at this chart now. So quite a lot of important things, and you'll notice that I have written the date, the various dates where the aspects are exact. Therefore, they will have been building before and separating afterwards. But this is the main part, and as you can see, if you look at this left-hand side, from the 27th of August through to the 7th of September, there's a string of really, really important aspects, and I will take you through them shortly. But let's look at this chart, and we can see the full moon eclipse, the lunar eclipse, the total lunar eclipse, linked in red, the sun at 15 Virgo 23, the moon at 15 Pisces 23. And you'll see the south node there next to the sun and the north node next to the moon. And that's at 18 degrees of Virgo Pisces. And I just saw on my list of figures and celebrities with that degree, we've also got Trump's natal Uranus at 17 degrees of Gemini. So it's very close. It's going to be angled, squared by this, the nodal axis, and also the total lunar eclipse. So this is big stuff for President Trump as well. And I think he's in a very, very difficult position, even if he's managed to kind of finesse things in the way of the USA being sort of out of things and it being down to Ukraine to continue the war with Putin if they so wish. It's got nothing to do with America anymore. So he may have washed his hands of Ukraine and got America out of, responsibility for its failure, should it fail. I think that his position is very precarious. And of course, there could be lots of other things going on at this time that are relevant to his very, you wouldn't think he's in a shaky position, but he is. That's what we're looking at. And that Uranus is really emphasizing that. Uranus, the planet of revolution and change. So when we look at the horoscope here, you'll see that I've drawn in a configuration. And yes, it's that kite. Now, how many times I've talked about this configuration? It isn't there all the time, but it has been quite a lot of the time. And it depends on the faster moving planets. Well, the sun, the moon, yes, they're not planets, they're the lights, but Mercury, Venus, and Mars to come along and form the opposition to that Saturn-Neptune conjunction, or the opposition to Pluto, or the opposition to Uranus to create the effect of this kite configuration. There's always an opposition. So on this occasion, what we've got here is, as I have set this chart of the lunar eclipse from the perspective of Washington, as the eclipse occurs, then we've got the MCIC axis at 1 degree Libra, 2 of Aries, and that's within a hair of the natal USA MCIC axis, which is at 1 degree Libra, Aries, and the ascendant-descendant axis is not 14 degrees of Sagittarius, but 12 degrees of Sagittarius. So I think I'm very correct in thinking that this lunar eclipse is going to have a very big and important effect on the United States. And when we look at full moons and eclipses, there are times of closure in that things come to an end and you can sign on the dotted line, but they also bring simmering situations to boiling points. So we must also always think of that as well. And relationships are always important when we're judging full moons and when we're judging eclipses, because it's a polarity, and all polarities seek union, if you like. So in this case, we're looking at a lunar eclipse in reference to a nation's chart. In this case, we're looking at it from the perspective of Washington. We're sort of looking at, the USA's relationships or relations with other countries. So it's really emphasized in this particular chart. We can see it very, very clearly. Now, just to the side of the sun at the 12 o'clock point, we find Mercury. And Mercury is applying to the sun. So the sun-Mercury conjunction does play into this lunar eclipse. And what do we think about, a conjunction of the sun and Mercury? Well, it's about the mind. It's about movement. It's about conclusions. And of course, the full moon is about conclusions as well. And it can be about epiphany. It can be about discussions and the exchanges of information. So we know that this full moon is going to be key to major peace agreements, if there are going to be any at all. In my view, it's going to be very difficult to get a peace agreement in this climate, one that will last anyway. So, but anyway, there are discussions around it, and probably other discussions of importance. And if we're thinking about our own lives and what this lunar eclipse and what it's doing to our own lives, when we put the sun conjunct Mercury, then we're looking at things to do with our decision making, our plans, and the conversations we have to that. And also, I suppose, if you are very spiritually minded, when we think about the lunar eclipse having a lot to do with our spiritual growth as well, then teachings and understandings and moments of clarity related to our spiritual life are certainly also within this period of the lunar eclipse. If we look down the side, we come first of all to the 27th of August, we see that, and this is before the lunar eclipse, of course, that Venus will be opposing Pluto. So we have the idea, whenever we put Venus and Pluto together, if we want one word for it, it's passion. And of course, there's passion when we feel passionate about someone in a good way, but there's also heated passion when we feel very angry about something. And we've seen in previous videos that I've done the Mercury-Pluto opposition that's been in the point of the kite. And a little bit earlier, Venus would also have been in that position. So it's played into the overarching importance of Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, and Saturn in their little configuration, which is like a mini grand trine. The fact that these three are always resonating with each other is the reason we've got such colossal things going on in terms of world events. So every time we get another configuration like this one in this chart with a kite on the MCIC axis forming it, then we know there is some real crisis and big stuff going on in the world. To get back to my little list on the left-hand side, Saturn goes into Pisces on the 1st of September. So, of course, it will be within spitting distance of Sheets at 29 degrees of Pisces. That's going to be playing off on all those important things that we've seen in the past, where we've seen these major eruptions and major earthwork, so to speak, and the force of nature we've seen such a lot of. Things to do with the sea, things to do with navigation, with navies, all that kind of thing. So we see that coming into play quite strongly from the 1st of September again. As we go down to the 3rd of September, we get Mercury in square to Uranus. By the time of the lunar eclipse, as we can see here, Mercury will have separated from Uranus and will no longer be in contact with it. But around about the 3rd of September, it will be at exactitude. And this is a time when things can get very sparky indeed. And I do use my words carefully, because sparks of one sort or another are very Uranian, whether we're talking about electricity, whether we're talking about the weather, whether we are talking about revelations and epiphanies and explosions. This is all very Mercury-Uranus. So keep that in mind around that period of time. By the time we get to the 5th of September, Mars in Libra is squaring Jupiter. And we can see in this chart, Mars at 20 degrees of Libra in the 11 o'clock position, Jupiter at 19 of Cancer in the 2 o'clock position. We can still see they're very close by the 7th of September and the date of the eclipse. On the plus side, a Mars-Jupiter connection, can put a lot of goodwill into the mix. And there can be some very great and good developments. There's a kind of generosity with Mars and Jupiter. It's a large scale, big kind of combination. But I will say with Jupiter as well, and with Mars being the planet of war, the planet of action, that of course we could see escalation here as well, and the escalation of difficulties. And I have to say, looking at this eclipse chart in terms of the USA, we could be looking at some interesting things going on with the economy. I mean, is this the point at which the tariffs really impact the economy, and not in a good way? Or is it the time when everybody recognizes, my goodness, abundance is here? Those tariffs have surely worked. But I think looking at that lunar eclipse being square to Trump's natal Uranus, I don't think very much is really going his way at this time. So this may not be a good sign for the US economy at this time. 6th of September, the day before the lunar eclipse, Uranus is stationary retrograde. And of course, it will have been stationary for some time before that. And whenever a planet is stationary, it's more powerful. Its properties are more recognizable. We notice things much more. So with anything Uranus, we're looking at the digital world. We're looking at things to do with satellites, to do with, it can be with innovation as well, and enterprise. Uranus is very enterprising, but it's very unstable, and sparks of one sort or another do tend to occur. And with full moons, and we know this full moon is also close to Mercury, we often have communication blips. It can be quite difficult for travel. And what I want to say to you folks out there is that I'm actually traveling, flying on the 6th of September. I have no choice. That's what I'm going to do. But I'm, taking it in my stride. But technically, a lunar eclipse isn't the best of times for travel and for negotiations, and especially when we've got Uranus stationary retrograde, then that's throwing even another spanner in the works when it comes to smooth communications. And then, of course, I've ended on this total lunar eclipse, which we can see is in all its glory. I am just kind of interested in how the moment of this eclipse from the perspective of Washington is close or within, minutes almost of its natal chart. It does say to me that this is a really, really important period for America, and a lot of things are going to shape America and its future at this particular point. So I'm going to come away from that and get on with the sign by sign, going through what this important eclipse has to say in the charts, or from the perspective of all 12 signs. Now, to those of you who aren't familiar with my channel and aren't too sure how, what perspective I'm taking it from the sun sign. So if you know you're a Sun Cancer or a Sun Sagittarius, watch that section. On the other hand, if you know your rising sign, and more importantly, you know the degree of that rising sign and the house cusps that follow, you'll know exactly where this lunar eclipse is occurring, and you can look at that interpretation as well. But I have to say that I think it's very valid from the sun sign. The sun is the center of our solar system. It is the center of our being as well, the core of our identity. And if we think about how things are placed from that perspective, it's still going to have an effect. Although, I think if you know exactly where that lunar eclipse is occurring, that's probably the one you want to take first and foremost. So I'm going to start with Pisces. I'm going to start at the end of the zodiac, because, of course, this total lunar eclipse is in the sign of Pisces. So Pisces for you, this means the moon is in your first house, your first solar house, and the sun in the seventh house. Now, you may have heard me say a few moments ago that full moons on their own have a lot to do with relationships, your relationship with other people. And in the case that I was looking at in mundane astrology, the relationship a nation has with other nations. So we think about closure and completion with a full moon, signing on the dotted line. And in terms of a relationship, you could see why this might indicate that you're ready to sign up to a commitment with someone. You're either going to marry them, you're going to move in with them, you're going to start working with them, you're signing a business partnership, those kind of things that would signify that. But also, all full moons bring simmering situations to boiling point. And when they're eclipsed, they're going to do that in stereophonic sound. So anything that comes to the bubble now is really going to be hot. And we can also look at the idea that things are done and dusted on a full moon and on a total lunar eclipse. So for some of you Pisceans, this lunar eclipse says a relationship is over. Now, it could be, as I said, a business relationship. It could be a working relationship, your relationship with a company. So you're under contract to a company, so that's at an end. Or it can be a romantic relationship or a relationship like a marriage. And it is what it is, especially with eclipses. We've got this sense of fate and destiny. You know, what is going to be happening around the time of the eclipse is very fateful. Now, it doesn't mean you just sit back and wait for it all to happen and you allow people to step all over you or whatever the appropriate, advice would be. It just means being super aware that these are the indications, and that as you handle the events that unravel at the time of a lunar eclipse, you're looking at them objectively. You've got some kind of connection to what I'm saying, and you're not going to see everything as being done and dusted. In a sense, that might be what's going on, but what is your reaction to that? What do you do next? That's the important thing. Can't necessarily do anything about something that's happened, but you can most certainly do something about what you do next and how things move forward from that point. And that's the important thing to remember about this lunar eclipse. If you look at the other planets that I've drawn in, we've got Saturn and Neptune, Uranus and Pluto. We can sort of see how this bigger picture is kind of impacting you. And Uranus in Gemini means it's squaring your sign. And certainly if you've got a February birthday, well, let's say around about the 19th, 20th, 21st of February, Uranus will have been squaring your sun for a while. So this is also going to have to be part of the story. And maybe it's not just the Pisceans who are born around about the 6th, 7th, 8th of March, who are in line for the biggest effects of this lunar eclipse. But those of you born around the 19th, 20th, 21st of February, because this is where the rest of the planets really are focusing on. Saturn, Neptune, Pluto, they're all caught up in this little triangular configuration. So it becomes a point at when you may feel as though you may feel powerless, Pisces, but you're not powerless. You're really not. You've got to step aside, think about it, and the actions you take will then decide how something unravels. So don't lie back and take it. Don't just assume there's nothing more that you can do. Maybe there's nothing more you can do in a certain way, but there is most certainly something you can do in another way. Remember, I also talked about epiphanies and understandings with this lunar eclipse. And I think that's also something you want to take away from what I'm saying, that this is a time of profound epiphanies for you. Okay, Pisces? So let's come to Aries. And As you can see from the horoscope here, the eclipse, the sun and the moon fall into the areas of the 12th house and the 6th house. The sun is in the 6th house, the moon is in the 12th house. So this is that axis of health and healing. And so this lunar eclipse has something to do with your health. It has something to do with the healing process. And they can be sort of very different, because it can be the realization that you've got a health problem and you need to deal with it. But it can also be the end of the healing process, or the end of something after which healing can take place. And that's a much broader picture. It isn't just about the health of your body and your dental health, but it's mental health, it's soul health, it's a spiritual health as well. So this lunar eclipse is particularly important, and you may find that you're having extremely vivid dreams, or you've got the sense of something going to happen, or a sense of an understanding of something that you didn't have before. This is a very psychic axis. So don't be surprised if you start seeing things. Now, maybe you should still take yourself to the doctor to make sure that you haven't got a real mental imbalance. But, you know, as we all talk about having premonitions or big dreams, that may be the case for you with this particular lunar eclipse. What I would also say here, Aries, is that you are a very open sign, and you are someone who lives in the moment very often, and you respond in the moment to things, sometimes without thinking. And remember, I'm in Aries as well. And that really, I think this is not the time for knee-jerk responses. It is absolutely the time to tell yourself, whatever's happening at this time, don't go into action just yet. Really look at all angles of a situation. Really sleep on it, think about it, take good advice before you really do either pull the plug on something or take some kind of action which is not in your best interest. Saturn and Neptune, as you can see, I've drawn in at the early degrees of Aries. And especially if you have a March birthday, then you're caught up in this configuration because of the way Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Pluto are all in this little triangle. And periodically, you know, these other planets come along and create that kite formation that I've shown. And so this is a very important period for you, because there may be offers, there may be opportunities, there may be things that are happening. And as a result of these things that are happening, life will change accordingly. Saturn and Neptune aren't all bad, but they are difficult. They're difficult to read. They're difficult to establish really what may come out of it. You're in no man's area very often and are having to rely not only on your gut instincts, but I think also on the advice of some very good people. And whatever happens around the time of this lunar eclipse, it should illuminate something for you. In fact, I rather like that word, illuminate. And maybe if you've been struggling to find a solution to an existential problem, this idea of illumination is really important. But also we must remember that a lunar eclipse, like all full moons, will bring matters to a head. And since this is also the axis of health and healing and all of that I just mentioned, you have to be particularly careful of your health at this particular time. Okay, Aries. Taurus. Well, if we look at this chart, Taurus, we'll see that the sun is in the 5th solar house and the moon is in the 11th solar house. So we call this axis the axis of collaboration and creativity. And I often talk about a gestation period being complete when we have a full moon on our on the axis of our 5th, 11th houses. So it may be that you have been working on something. It's been a creative project. It's been a business endeavor. It's been something a little bit more creative than that. It could even be a love affair. It could even be a pregnancy. Gestation and pregnancy certainly go together. So we've got this idea of the end of a gestation period and something happening thereafter. And it can be related to all these areas. Plus, it can be related to your offspring if you have children. This full moon may show that there is completion and closure in their lives, or it may show you that if there's been some issue between you and one of your offspring, that this is either the end of that difficulty and you're on to new territory thereafter, or it could mean it's the peak of those difficulties that you're having with an offspring. But let's also look at this idea of, the other things about this lunar eclipse, which relate to epiphanies and awakenings and enlightenment and understanding. That this is, and I think a lot of you have been, because Taurus is such, well, it's an earth sign, you're a very down-to-earth kind of sign, and you really tackle your problems well. You deal with them well. You've got a lot of common sense. And I think what's been going on in your life for a little while is that things have kind of defeated you. They haven't been, common sense has been able to solve them. They've been out of the realms of common sense. And what you've been relying on is somehow the fates to sort it out, which is very untypical of Taurus. But, I think that's in there. I think there is a sense, looking at this arrangement in the houses that we've got it, that this is a time of release and liberation, which sort of suggests that the existential problem you've been dealing with, the events around the time of the eclipse are going to solve it. If we're looking at other things about this lunar eclipse, lunar eclipse, not solar eclipse, we can also think about actively deciding to end something. And if we think about what I also said about love affairs and affairs, affairs of the heart, some 6 months ago, or possibly even a year ago, there may have been a new relationship. And you're going to know at this stage whether that relationship is going to last, it has legs, so to speak, or whether the end is in sight. It is what it is. And as always, with things that appear to come about by fateful circumstances, even if you feel that you would have liked things to have ended differently or to not ended at all, if you're presented with a fait accompli at that time, remember that you still have a choice as to what you do next. And that's so important. And it may be a point at which the things that you really like, the idea that you have a really good way of looking at situation and you like to solve problems, this may be the point at which that can start to kick in. Okay, Taurus? Gemini, as you can see from the chart on the screen right now, the lunar eclipse is taking place across the 10th and 4th houses, one of the really important, or two of the really important areas of your horoscope. All the houses that sort of begin each quadrant, 1st house, 7th house, 10th house, and 4th house, are the most dynamic houses and the things that really seem to play a very important part in our life story. So the sun has been moving through the 4th house since about the 23rd of August, and in fact the time of the new moon squaring Uranus, so that we can see that there has been, or that there will have been, quite a focus on things to do with the home and family, things to do with the foundations of the future, which can be plans for the future, the things that represent the rock that your life is built upon. And that is often about family, isn't it? But it can be other things as well. So Things are settled on a full moon. So if there's been a negotiation going on, something to do with a mortgage, maybe something to do with property, something to do with the family, maybe it's career related, maybe it's domestically related. This full moon, eclipsed full moon, is going to settle it. But we have to remember that Uranus has been in the mix and continues to be in the mix. So there are still elements going of the situation going on that kind of pop up out of nowhere, so that they are unusual, unexpected, and sometimes uninvited. So especially if you are if you have a May birthday, Uranus is much more active in your life right now. So on the one hand, it's giving you a sense of liberation, which is good. But on the other hand, it's breaking things up. And that isn't always so good. So we have an element here that we need to look at into this lunar eclipse, that there has either been a breakup or a breakdown of a situation, or let's hope more positively, a breakthrough in a situation, and that it is completed on the total lunar eclipse or thereabouts. Remember, the waning moon, as the moon wanes towards the new moon, that is still a period in which everything I'm saying can be relevant. So don't get, confused if you can't actually sign a document on the total lunar eclipse. You've got time, but it's in the process of becoming at the time of this lunar eclipse. The moon is in the 10th house, so the moon is reflecting your standing in the world. That's why career can come into this as well. And the moon, of course, is only just passing through. It's only 3 days it's going to be in this area. The sun is taking the greater time, and so the greater importance, in a funny kind of way, is to do with home, family, the foundations, the roots of life, all of that kind of thing I've been talking about. But in some instances, it is very important, so that we either get closure here in the sense that a contract can be signed. It's a good time to sign a contract. But on the other hand, it can be a contract is broken. It's at an end. It's a conclusion. And maybe you know about that, and it's not a big deal. But often with eclipses, things come about in ways that we're not expecting. Things come out of the woodwork that you aren't expecting. And I think that's very much to be taken into consideration at this time. If we look again at the 3 outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, which I've drawn in along with Saturn, you can see how important this triumvirate is in terms of shaping your life by circumstances beyond your control. But of course, as I'm saying, pretty well to every sign of the zodiac. Maybe an eclipse is the event that happens that you can't do anything about at the time, but it's what you do next that you do have a choice over. And that is really important to remember. So this would be a good time to consider, am I really fulfilled in my job? Is my base in life, the bedrock of my life, what's going on with it? Is it compatible with my hopes, my dreams, my wants and desires? And this full moon acts like an epiphany and gets you to see your priorities, what you really want. And of course, after that point, there can be actions taken. Okay, Gemini? Let's go to Cancer. Cancer, as you look at the chart on the screen, you'll see that the lunar eclipse is cutting across the 3rd and 9th houses of the horoscope. And this axis of the horoscope has a lot to do with knowledge. It has a lot to do with things that you're seeking. And of course, the idea of a full moon and an eclipse full moon is that you've reached a conclusion. So there is an idea that what you're seeking is found. And let's just use that as a statement that you can apply to anything in your life. What you've been seeking is now to be found. There's also a lot to do with epiphanies about this particular lunar eclipse. And so it may also be a time around the eclipse that you get some kind of understanding of, oh, goodness, this is what I should be doing. This is what needs to happen. So the eclipse is coming, it's kind of like it kind of stimulates those ideas or those understandings in yourself. I don't want to say it causes it. You know, I don't like to talk, when I'm talking about astrology, as planets causing events or lunar eclipse causing events. I'd rather use the idea that eclipses and everything else preside over them. They are looking at what's going on. They're the planets that are in play. This is the lunar eclipse in play. And so this idea, it doesn't cause the epiphanies, but the epiphanies that you have are being presided over by this eclipse, and therefore they're very significant. They could even be life-changing. This is also to do with your outlook. You know, we look at outlook and think about our way we look at the world and our attitudes, our opinions, all of those kind of things. So this can change, or this can be illuminated. This can be an important part of this lunar eclipse story. But we've also got the outlook that is what we're looking at out of the window. What do we see? Both in the terms of our neighborhood, the surrounding district, and on a larger level, what is our view? What is our outlook out of the window in terms of traveling? We've gone on holiday. We've gone on a business trip. We're somewhere where we aren't usually. So we've got a new outlook. So something about our views and the way we look at the world, the way we look at our small world, the understandings we have, the knowledge that's important to us, this lunar eclipse is playing into all of that. And I think at this particular time, September, a lot of courses are starting. And of course, it's a time when new terms are starting for children and young adults as they go to university. So it is about a journey beginning. And it's also about the end of a journey, because when you think, if you're going to university or going to school, you are going to take a course, you are going somewhere, and that is a new beginning and going to be a journey. But also the journey up to this point is over. So there's looking at this in the sense of a journey is another very important way to look at this total lunar eclipse. And if you are traveling on that eclipse, as indeed am I, then that journey is going to be memorable. What happens on that journey, maybe in the way of what you see, what you hear, the conclusions you draw, is indeed going to be very important for your future going forward. It's about mind. It's about knowledge. It's about world views. All of that, this lunar eclipse, and given it has a lot to do with epiphanies, those are the things that are targeted at this particular time. And so to Leo. Leo, if you look at the chart on the screen, you'll see that the sun is in the second house and the moon is in the eighth house. And this is what I call the financial axis of the chart. It's really rather more about self-worth and about you, how other people value you and the shared values that you have with others. So it's all those things. And of course, that can mean absolutely nothing to do with money or possessions, but really the self-value and the values you hold in life. So this lunar eclipse is accentuating all of that. It's either bringing a simmering situation to the boiling point, or it is bringing matters that you've been in negotiation about to a conclusion. It is both an end and a beginning. And if we look again at this idea of values, both in the terms of your own values of life, but those that you share with partners and other people, we extend that out to finances and the financial relationships you have with other people, whether they are banks and lending institutions, or whether they your partner because you have shared financial responsibilities, what you get from your partner, we can also be looking at things that come to you from other people. So this lunar eclipse may indeed signify a settlement, so that after a period of time where you've been waiting to settle something and there's a financial aspect to all of that, this is what this lunar eclipse is all about. It's all about that settlement. And hopefully it's all about, it's done and dusted. You've got it. That's it. And it can also be about an inheritance. So maybe there is an inheritance due to you and you are receiving it, or shortly will receive it. But you know, an inheritance can be all sorts of things, can't it? We can inherit a lot of things in life, not in terms of objects, but we can inherit ideas. We can inherit belief systems. You'd be surprised what we can inherit from people, whether they're our parents or people in our extended family. And so this full moon is also about what things that we have thought are, what have come from other people, and what are our own values and opinions, not those of others. Coming back to finances again, I think for some Leos who are in financial difficulties, and I'm not saying every Leo is at all, I'm just saying some are. When we look at a lunar eclipse on the 2nd, 8th axis, we could be looking at the end of that financial crisis. However that end is, whether it's because, more money comes in and it resolves it, whether you've got new income, whether you've got a loan, whether you've got an inheritance and that resolves the problem, or whether you're going to have to resolve it by going into receivership. And that 2nd, 8th axis, the 8th house itself, is about receivership in all its manifestations, not just the sense of going into receivership, but also what you receive from others. You get this picture now of what this 2nd, 8th axis is all about. And I think I want to leave you with some words of advice, because we are not our possessions. We are, what we earn is not who we are. Who we are is cannot be read in terms of money, although sometimes we think it is. And sometimes that answers a problem, in that we might have got so caught up in the finances of it, or the things that we may lose, the objects, the possessions, the property that we may lose. And what we need to do is detach from that and see it as being nothing to do with our personal value, but in and of itself, it's separate. And that sometimes helps to negotiate better and to get a much better grip on something that's quite difficult. And I mentioned the word property just then. And that's also something to mention, because you can do a property deal here, so that you can sell a property, buy a property. It's done and dusted. The exchange and completion can happen. So that might also be in this mix. All right, Leo? Virgo. Well, of course, this is really right in your backyard, Virgo, because the sun is in your sign, the moon is in your opposite sign. And I think if you go back to the preview, before I got into it sign by sign, I did talk quite a lot about, Virgo, Pisces, and what in general this lunar eclipse means. And I did also refer back to the March period, when there was a reversal. You had the sun was in Pisces and the moon was in Virgo. The relationship axis is brought into play with this full moon, especially in terms of the solar chart and your sun sign. And so we see here the idea of closure and completion that is attached to any full moon, but particularly with a lunar eclipse. It is time to make the ties that bind. So you commit yourself to another person, to a company, to a partnership of some description. That would be a perfect rendering of this particular lunar eclipse. But of course, Full moons are endings as well. They bring things to a conclusion. So just as easily, you get the end of a relationship as well. And nobody likes the end of a relationship. And it's often a sense of failure that you couldn't make it work. But, you know, in the big sweep of time, when you look back on that relationship that you're sad about losing, or that you feel somehow you've failed in that relationship, and then you'll see it in a bigger picture because you will have moved on some considerable time, you can start to see, oh, well, if that hadn't have happened, if I hadn't met that person, gone through that, I wouldn't have this. I see how my life turned in a new direction from the end of that relationship. And I think you need to keep this in mind. If indeed you are breaking from a company or ending a business partnership, or a marriage is breaking up, or some other love affair is breaking up, it's not a lot of fun. And we always do think, what lies ahead? I have no idea what's going to replace this. But life moves on. And if we have a good attitude, and if we recognize that life is a series of endings and beginnings, that's what it does. And we're told that, or shown that, every month by the new and full moon, and then by that bigger cycle of the new moon in a sign and a full moon in the same sign. Endlessly, we're showing you that cycle of endings and beginnings. So it is good to close things down now, Virgo, especially anything that you share with other people, a relationship in particular, or aspects of a relationship. But this lunar eclipse may also bring to an end a period that's been quite difficult for a relationship. So you've been through all sorts of upsets and discussions, and from this point in time, if you're going to stay together, then it can get a lot better. The signature of this lunar eclipse will be on an ending of some description. And I think that's really important to bear in mind, even if we don't get a direct hit on that at this point in time that I'm talking to. You can't put your finger on it and say, oh yeah, that came to an end. It may take a little bit more time before you realize and are able to reflect on what has closed. But it is a very good time to think about relationships, those which definitely nurture you and are in your best interests, and those which do you more damage than good. And it's a time to think, do I need that person in my life? Do I need that relationship? And really and truly, if you don't need it, remember, the sun is in your sign. You are the Virgo. The power is with you. Then, take your power, empower yourself, and say, enough is enough. And we look too, I have to say, at the setup with Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn, that little triumvirate that is holding sway over everything that's going on in our lives. Yes, there is an element of fate and destiny in all of this, as there always is about relationships anyway. But you do have some power. And even if that power is, once something has happened, you then decide what you are going to do about that situation. Okay, Virgo? Libra. As you will see as you look at the chart on the screen, we've got that big red line bringing together the sun at one end and the moon at the other. That is the total lunar eclipse. The sun is in your 12th house, the moon is in your 6th house. And this is a very sensitive axis of the horoscope. In the 12th house, you heard me talking earlier about the moon in Pisces, or Pisces, and the house, the 12th house, being an area of transcendence. This is where we transcend things. We rise above them. But it's also an area where we escape. And sometimes escapism isn't the right thing. To rise above a problem, to rise above a situation is a good thing. To escape from a problem is a bad thing. So these two things need to be considered in light of what's going on at this time in reference to this total lunar eclipse. By rising above the situation that is highlighted by this lunar eclipse, are you rising above it and able to see it better and handle it in a wise, higher self way? Or are you escaping from it, escaping into, things that cannot possibly be, or escaping through, I don't know, all our escape patterns, whether it's having a glass of wine or, digging our head in the sand. I mean, they're all escape routes. So it's really important, Libra, that you are conscious of what is real and what isn't real on this lunar eclipse. Now, sometimes it's very difficult to get information from people. And as you know, from if you listen to the earlier part of this video, I talked about Mercury and the Sun being close together so that understandings and conversations and realizations are all part of this lunar eclipse. So it is important, really, that there is rational thought given to situations that are in the forefront of your life at this time, whether it's something that just happens at the time of the lunar eclipse, or whether it's something that's been building and is now front forward, highlighted by this lunar eclipse. You really need to have a very good, objective, reasoned response to it. Now, this is where it gets difficult because, and I said this to your opposite sign, Aries, because it's cutting across the same solar axis for Aries as well, that this is a time when your psychic senses are likely to be supercharged. Your spider sense will be working overtime. And that's so useful. I mean, this is what makes us, what makes things happen in our life in a way, because we've used our X factor. That is in play. You may have big dreams. You may have experiences that kind of defy rational thinking. So at the same time, as I'm saying, you need to be objective and clear and not escaping from things, I'm saying at the same time that this is a time of powerful psychic realizations. It may be a very good period if you're on a spiritual journey and consciously, taking those steps, that this is a time of profound realizations and a big milestone on your spiritual journey. Very much so with this lunar eclipse. And it's a beautiful thing. But we can also, or we have to also bear in mind that a lunar eclipse, like all full moons, will bring difficulties right up to a head and simmering issues right up to the surface, and they need to be met. And perhaps sometimes on the eclipse itself, we're not at our best making the correct judgment. It may come later. So I think, do what you have to do. If something comes up, something happens to you at the time of this lunar eclipse, and you think, oh my goodness, I need to do something about this, do only what you need to do in the immediate time. Don't really think too far ahead until the lunar eclipse is settled. And then you can think about right action. Sometimes, this is a very relationship-oriented lunar eclipse. And it may be that a relationship is in jeopardy here, or a relationship is at a tipping point. Are you in or are you out? And all of that will be made clear to you around this time. But maybe it's better to let a few days go past before you really respond to any of those things, as I've said to every single sign pretty well. Eclipses are what happens to you. They preside over events that have just come about that you have no control over. However, it's what you do next that's all important. Okay, which is why I've been talking about all the things I've been talking about. Okay, Libra. Scorpio. This lunar eclipse is taking place on the 11th fifth axis, and that's referring to the houses. The sun is currently moving through the 11th house, and when the lunar eclipse occurs, the moon will be moving through the 5th house. It's only going to spend 3 days in that 5th house. So the emphasis, in a way, is always on the larger object, the sun, if you like, and that's in the 11th house. And the moon is illuminating it. It's what's being introduced into the mix. And that's why you get this idea of things being at a crossroads or a watershed, all those good words that say that we've got to this point, and after this point, things are going to be different. This axis is known as the axis of gestation. The 11th house is about collaboration, and the 5th house is really about creativity. It's more singular. It's more to do with the self. It's a singular idea, whereas the 11th house is what you do as a group, as a collaboration. So collaborations and creative endeavors are in the mix here, and we could be seeing the end of a project, so that you've been working on something, preparing for a long time, and guess what? It's done. It's ready to be seen. So there's a very nice aura about this conclusion. And because it's an eclipse, whatever you're delivering, whatever is ready to be brought into reality, that this is going to be something that's going to be life-changing at some point, or certainly going to have a big effect on your life. But of course, we could also be looking at the gestation period in the literal sense, and that there is a baby to be born. Whether it comes on this eclipse or not, in a way, all this eclipse is doing is pointing to the idea that a gestation period has either just ended or it is about to end very shortly. And we get this idea of the birth of something. The 5th house is also about love affairs, and the 11th house is about kindred spirits and group affairs. You see how these two areas are conjoined in a way. So I talked about this on the first part of my video, and I talked about relationships that began in March, or maybe they began last September. And you can remember, that point at which they began. The point they're reaching on this total lunar eclipse is an important junction, is a crossroads, is a watershed. Is this relationship now going forward in a way where you're going to, commit to each other, or it may be committing to an enterprise? Commitment is in here. It's been something that's been going on for a while, and now we can see whether we're going to go forward with it or we're not. So here as well, for some Scorpios, is the idea that a love affair, is over because it hasn't got what it takes to be a long-term, full-blown commitment. And that's all, yes, of course, it's terribly sad. And you may think as well, because it happens, it's done, it's dusted, that's all there is to it. But there isn't really. Not only is there your reaction to what's happened, what you decide to do, but I think whenever we've loved somebody and we've lost them and we've had a broken love affair, we think we'll never replace it. We'll think we can't love again, when in fact, of course, you can. And the fact that you've loved this much means very definitely that you can love again. Love is never lost. It's always, it's there. It's a beautiful thing, even if it ended badly. And that means that you can love again. I think even if you don't want to hear that, and you have got a broken heart, you will heal. And of course, I talked about healing as well with this lunar eclipse. Let's not forget, simmering situations come to a head, and these can be situations in any walk of life. They could be you know, the area of family, they can be the area of friendship, they can be to do with work, they can be to do with anything. So the simmering situation has come to the bubble, and it is time to resolve it. And again, you might not get resolution in a heartbeat at the time of the eclipse, but the eclipse marks the idea of resolution, and that will follow after the total lunar eclipse. It's in a good place, this lunar eclipse, Scorpio, even if you feel the time is stormy and you're not always enjoying events. From a technical astrological perspective, it's in an area whereby good things can so come out of this particular configuration. Sagittarius. The eclipse here, as you will see from the horoscope on your screen, the sun is at the very top of your solar chart. It's in the 10th house, and the moon is in the 4th house. But what you also need to take note of is that little television aerial sitting at the 3 o'clock position, and that's planet Uranus. Now, Uranus isn't tied up to this full moon, but if you remember when I was talking earlier on the video, I was talking about the new moon on the 23rd of August, which was square Uranus. And that was the beginning of something, of which this total lunar eclipse may be the ending of it. It can be a short cycle in that something was started, something happened, and it's taken a couple of weeks to go through the process to be done and dusted. It can be that short. Even if it's short, it can still be important. But it could be a longer thing. And I think, especially if you're an early Sagittarian, which means you've got a November birthday, then Uranus is opposing your sun sign. So you're already in a phase where things are changing very quickly. Things are happening in a very electric fashion. Some of the things you may be very excited about, and other things you may be deeply unsettled by. So Uranus is a factor, especially as it's stationary retrograde at this time. You may not really have control of the board. It may seem as though everything is out of your control. Well, sometimes that can be the case, and it's our job not to try to mess with it. We just have to let the situation unfold. I'm not going to say unravel, because that always sounds negative. Unfold means we allow something to unfold so that we can really see the full extent of it. And that's very important advice to take on board, Sag. Let it unfold. Don't try to get in there before it's fully unfolded, because you will make a mess of it. Let it fully unfold, sleep on it, take some good advice on it, and then act. And of course, it's not to say that something can't be offered to you at this time that will be absolutely wonderful, life-changing in a wonderful way. But you know what? You still need to think about it. You still need to think about aspects of it. We also look at the way Uranus is tied up with the triumvirate, Saturn and Neptune and Pluto. We can see that in a way there are the pieces on the chessboard are being moved around, and not necessarily by your hand, but you must trust it. This doesn't mean you abdicate responsibility for anything, but it does mean you trust the process. And you're a very philosophical sign, enormously positive about life, and you need that positivity now, but you need to lace that positivity with patience. Let things fully unravel. It seems to me that that's the message I've been trying to give you when I'm looking at this total lunar eclipse. Let things unfold fully before you decide what action you're going to take, because at that point, that is your input, that is your power to act. What's done is done, but what you do next is important. Okay? Capricorn. As you can see from the horoscope on the screen, the sun is in the 9th house, joined to the moon as a lunar eclipse with that red line, and the moon is in the 3rd house. I call this one of these, well, the area, both these areas are about seeking something. And maybe we can say by looking at this total lunar eclipse, you're seeking something and you found it, or you will find it. That's what that total lunar eclipse is saying. Or, what is presiding over events is this total lunar eclipse, and the ability to find what you're looking for is within this lunar eclipse. That's very profound, isn't it? Because I suppose you could say if you're looking for a lost object, maybe you'll find it, and that's all very nice. But really, in a broader sense, you're looking for love, you're looking for knowledge, you're looking for guidance, then here it comes on this total lunar eclipse. Now, I realize I've said a very profound thing there. If you're looking for love, you're now going to find it. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to find love on the total lunar eclipse, but it is a symbol and a signal that you can find what you're looking for. And maybe within that brief is the idea you've come this far. Remember the 3rd and 9th house, when we've got a full moon running across it, it is about the end of a journey. So it may be that you've been on a bit of a journey and that now it's possible to find what you're looking for. So all the steps you've taken along the way make this possible. And the lunar eclipse is symbolizing that. As and when love comes into your life, let's say, or the guidance that you're seeking comes to pass, may not be exactly on that lunar eclipse. But I would say that given it's, I also talked about a little bit earlier on this video, the idea that the new moon of the 23rd of August, this total lunar eclipse, 7th September, and the solar eclipse to come on the 21st of September, they're all linked. They're all a bit of a journey, connecting with events all on their own. So it is possible within this span of time that you do find what you're looking for. But if you don't, remember the signal is there for it. That's what this is symbolized. And it will come. I think that's important to remember. Now, of course, when I look at this, these houses, the 3rd and 9th, and I'm reminded really of the seeking of knowledge. This is a time when children are going back to school and adult children are going to university. So this may be part of the journey that we're talking about, that, this is, you've been on a journey up until the time you're ready to go to school or go to university. And then that in and of itself will also be a journey. But there are journeys that you take literally. You travel somewhere. So this total lunar eclipse could be saying that the journey you're taking is going to have lasting consequences. So it could be anything from who you meet and what happens to you on a journey to what happens at the destination. Or it may be that you're going to make a decision to make a journey, and that is also part of the, you're making it now. The journey is going to be taken later, but nonetheless, it was set in motion now, and that is going to be a very significant event in your life. We are living, as you know, in unprecedented times, and I think the getting of wisdom about our own place in this and our purpose, of course, in terms of what we're doing here. These are questions that we all find going on. And I think this is just exceptionally well marked in your, solar chart, Capricorn, at this time. This idea about what are you doing here? Where are you going? It's time for some answers. Okay. So finally, Aquarius, the last sign I'm going through. And we can see when we look at this chart on the screen, that the sun is in the 8th house and the moon is in the 2nd house. This is the axis of self-worth. The opposite houses are always linked in some way. Where the 2nd house is, it's more about you, it's about your values, your income, your property. In the 8th house, it's about those things that you share with other people and the relations that you have with others. So when we think about money, this is about the money we borrow from institutions and banks. It's about the relationships we have with credit card companies. But it can also be to do with our partner. If we're in a relationship, then we have shared finances. But it's not just about money. It's about values and what we spend money on, what our values are. It's also reflected by that, of course. And so when we look at this very powerful lunar eclipse across this axis, we see the potential for new agreements with banks, lending institutions, credit card companies, partners, investments, property purchases, property sales. This could be what this lunar eclipse is indicating. But it can also be about our value, how we feel valued by other people and the value we place in ourselves. And this could be the crunch that we're looking at with a lunar eclipse. Remember, simmering issues are brought to a head. So it could be in a relationship, even if you feel you're not being valued by that other person or that company, then you're going to feel it intensely at the time of this total lunar eclipse. And maybe thereafter, you'll make some important decisions as to not be with that company or that institution or that person. You know, you're going to cut your ties with them because of the difference, either in values, you have different values, but also in the sense that the value and the way they're treating you is not what it should be. So we would be looking at that. But we can also be looking at money and finances and property in the real sense. And we could either be looking in a positive way, that you are due some money, whether that's a settlement for some reason, settlement in a court case, settlement in terms of a job, or it could be an inheritance, so that monies are coming to you. And all of that is great and good. But of course, the idea of simmering situations coming to the bubble, if you're in a bit of a financial pickle already, then it's coming to the bubble and something needs to happen. Now, whether everything is resolved because money comes in and you resolved your problem, it's closed and completed in that way, or whether what you're going to do is go into receivership, because the 8th house is all about receiving things. And receivership is, well, you know what that means, that may be the solution. I'm not saying that all Aquarians are going to go into receivership. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that some, if the conditions are ripe for that, then this is an option. But I think above and beyond everything else, looking at where Pluto is, where Saturn and Neptune is, and Uranus, all of which I've drawn in here, this great triumvirate that is holding sway over all our lives and making us feel as though we're in situations not of our control, and, you know, finding our power in order to change things is really, really difficult. And here we've got now a total lunar eclipse, which is again something showing us the power of, you know, others, the power of fate, if you like. You know, that's what we are kind of looking at. And while it's an interesting factor to look at it like that and to be able to recognize what's going on, the important thing is we may not be able to control that situation, but once something has happened, you know, we do have choices to make. We can choose to do this, we can choose to do that, we can choose to do the other. And even if that choice appears to be the only one we have, we can still make it. And I think that's what's coming out, really, of this whole thing with talking about eclipses generally, and certainly talking about them in your case with this idea of finance, property, values, relationships, all of that, that you're not powerless, and you have the power to make a choice and a decision. And that, in a way, should be illuminated by this total lunar eclipse. Okay, Aquarius? So, yes, here I am concluding things on this long video. As you probably hear, my voice is fading, but that's what 2 hours talking will do to you. So it's interesting. I never write or make notes on what I'm going to talk about when I do these 12 signs and what I think, looking at the configurations that I'm talking about, how best to give you the advice for them. I don't take notes. I read the chart like a mandala as I'm talking. But I hear myself talking. And I kept saying the same thing so often, not in every single sign, but so often. But in a funny kind of way, this is central to what we can take away from this total lunar eclipse. And that is, eclipses may be fateful things, that when things happen to us, we think about, gosh, that's fate. Or what happens got nothing to do with you. You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the right time. And if that hadn't happened there, this would never have happened. But that's not the be all and end all, is it? Because, all right, you may be able to point the finger at fate and the cosmos and to say this has now shaped my life. But the really, really important thing is what you do next. That's your choice. That's your decision. I think that's so important to get across, especially if around this time. And, I've talked about seismic events in all its meaning, whether we're talking about big world events that change the world order, or whether we're talking about, magnitude 8.9 earthquakes. It changed the world. That is what we do in the wake of that, what we do next, that is important, is where we have the free will. Even if we've got into a situation where it seems as though we don't have a lot of wiggle room, we still have a decision to make as how we handle. How are we going to handle this? And I think, too, this idea of the lunar eclipse in Pisces, so it's at the very end of the cycle, and the idea that we reflect on the past year, the harvest, if you like, of our actions, the experiences that we had. We also need to give thanks for the difficulties that we had. And that, too, is a kind of processing of the fact that bad things happen, difficulties occur, life isn't always rainbows and unicorns. And that if we can assimilate that and get into a place where we find acceptance in that, that is a really, really good start, clearing our mind and our head, and also all the psychic energy around us, if you like, so that things can settle down, choices will be more apparent, and that we can make good choices in the wake of events, whether those events have been difficult or whether they have been immediately seen as a wonderful thing. So those are my thoughts, folks, and I hope they've struck a chord. And as ever, I look forward to seeing you all again. And thank you for being here today. Bye for now.